Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the legal, government, and political correspondent. I'm a lawyer here with the Lohman Abdo Law Firm in Hudson, Wisconsin. Joining us in studio is another candidate for office. We've been interviewing several, but what makes this candidate different, she's running for statewide office, and it's Sarah Godlewski. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jamie, for having me.
Absolutely. So Sarah, we want to introduce you to the viewers. This program is viewed not just in Hudson, but in other Western Wisconsin cable stations. So, plus it'll be on YouTube.
Great.
So you'll be a star. But what we'd like to know is a little bit about your background before we talk about the office you're running for. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a proud fifth-generation Wisconsinite, actually, Jamie, from Western Wisconsin.
Okay.
So I was born and raised in Eau Claire. My parents were public school teachers, actually, for the Eau Claire kind of school districts. And honestly, kind of how I ended up with the state treasurer is I have been in business and finance my entire career. So I spent time doing microfinance in rural India. After that, I spent time kind of advising Fortune 100 companies and then also large government agencies. So most notably, I was at the Pentagon for a little under a decade, where I worked for the Undersecretary of Defense.
Oh, so you were in the D.C. area?
I was in the D.C. area.
Okay.
Yep.
And now you're back to sanity land in
And
Wisconsin.
I missed home. I mean, it's in my blood.
There you
as
go.
a fifth generation
Okay.
one. So, yeah. And after being at the Pentagon, we looked at like investment strategies, how to do things better, save taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. I then became the director of strategy and performance for one of the fastest growing counties out west in Colorado. And we created a performance-based budget there. And then now I am the co-founder of a socially responsible investment firm here in Wisconsin.
Wow, that's a lot of information, but seems pretty relevant to state treasurer's job. And before we talk about that, I just want to probe a little bit more. So your education, where did you get educated?
Yeah, so I got my undergrad in actually peace and conflict resolution at George Mason University, which is a public school out east. And then I went to do my MPA at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm an
MPA, Masters of
Public Administration.
Okay.
And then I was a National Security Fellow with the Air War College. And so that's kind of the basis of it.
But it all started in the Eau Claire school system, huh?
It did.
All
It
right.
did. Oh, I should mention, actually, Jamie, before I get, I do have kind of a certificate in treasury management from Pepperdine MBA. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to short you and any of the accomplishments but that's great. The certificate of treasury management.
Yep.
All right. So you're a certified manager of people's money then. And that's good. Public money, and you've had experience saving taxpayers millions of dollars. Yep. That's all good. I haven't heard. I got education, work experience. What about family?
Yeah. So my parents are still in Eau Claire. I'm married to a wonderful man named Max, and we live right now in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And we have a great rescue dog named Tanner.
Okay.
So when I'm not on the campaign trail, we always try to hike and enjoy Wisconsin outdoors, and so.
And you mentioned you have family in the great city of Amory, Wisconsin,
I do.
too.
Yes, my the lead home family goes back many generations in Amory, as well as in Hudson, actually.
Oh.
So yes.
Well, very good. So, how about political experience? You know, you've got the experience in the Pentagon and so forth, but how about? Have you been involved in partisan politics? Obviously, now you are running on one of the party tickets, but any political experience in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I was really influenced by my grandma, who was a World War II vet, actually, and she always said, you got to be involved in your community. And so I was always, I guess you could say, a community organizer. When elections would come around, I would work to make sure that people were organized, they knew about where to vote, how to vote. So I've always been involved to try to get out the vote in that way. So.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the office that you aspire to win on November, is it 5th? Election 6th, November 6th, yeah. But people can vote now if they want, right? Yeah. But anyway, state treasurer, it's not one of the more glamorous positions, one that we hear about. and folks probably can kind of figure out what a governor does,
Yep.
what a state representative does, but state treasurer, assuming it has something to do with money,
Yep.
but could you give us a little bit more? What are the constitutional duties of the state treasurer?
Yeah, so really what's unique, I think, about this office is that as far as the Constitution, it kind of just talks about it being the state's chief banker, or almost like the chief financial officer. But a lot of those responsibilities kind of reside in the person in that position to use the bully pulpit, I think, to advocate for good fiscal policies. Some of the things specifically of note, one is that it is the trustee to it's the financial trustee to 4 trust funds that are worth over $1.2 billion. And so,
Which trust funds are those?
so you can kind of, I think the best way to categorize them is they're called like the common school trust funds. So there's like a university trust fund under that. There's like a K through 12. There is what's called like the normal school fund, which is also kind of part of the college fund. And then there is like the largest one, which is like the common school fund itself.
Okay, very good. So what relationship does it have to the Department of Revenue?
So here's what's really, I think, interesting about this role is that the way that the founders of Wisconsin's Constitution, the way they wrote it, is that the treasurer, unlike the governor and the legislature, is not involved in the budget process.
Right.
So they literally have no say in how they tax you. And further, the treasurer does not collect your money or spend your money. But the difference is that this office should be then accounting for your money because it's completely agnostic to those responsibilities. But currently, that accounting has been primarily happening under the same like governor and the legislature, which is almost like the fox watching the hen house kind of thing.
Okay.
And you should have, this is like a built-in internal control for taxpayers to kind of say, did you spend my money the way that you said you would? And right now, this office has not been doing that, but this goes back into, this is the person that can really make this position.
All right, so the treasurer is like the same level as the Secretary of State, the Attorney General.
Yep.
And the Superintendent of Department of Public Instruction.
Okay. Yeah, yep, DPI, yeah.
Okay, so those are all elected offices, although I think DPI is not partisan for some reason.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's elected in the spring.
Right,
Yep.
right. But it definitely is on the ballot every 4 years,
Yep.
At the same time as Governor and
Yep.
Attorney General,
Yep.
correct?
Yeah, correct, yep.
All right, so you've told us a little bit about what treasurer does. Why are you running for that position? What has motivated you to run for that?
Yeah, so as someone who spent their career in business and in finance, Jamie, I was just appalled when I read that they were going to remove this office.
And who's they?
So there was primarily, I believe, the Republican legislature was kind of pushing through and saying, this is big government. It doesn't add value to the people of Wisconsin. We should get rid of it. Now, an interesting fact is that we would have been the first state, basically, one of the first states to remove our financial officer and completely just relinquish those responsibilities. And somebody who has seen what can happen, I mean, I would never advise a company or invest in a business that did not have a separate financial officer. It's important that we kind of keep those checks and balances and provide accountability. So I remember talking to some legislators and saying, are we gonna do something to make sure this office is actually protected? And they said, Sarah, I don't think there's anything else we can do. It's going to the people of Wisconsin and they'll probably remove it. Well, in this conversation, I actually connected with former state treasurer, Republican Jack Voigt, and the two of us formed the Save Our Fiscal Watchdog ballot committee and traveled the state educating people on what the treasurer could and should be doing.
And
for
when
the
was
people of
this going
Wisconsin.
on?
So the vote to remove the office was back on April 3rd of 2018.
Okay.
So just 7 months ago was that? But it was just earlier this year. And we formed the committee basically in December.
Okay.
And then worked for those kind of leading up to
So
that.
sometime during 2017, the legislature had to pass this in order to get, or was it citizen petition? Which was it?
Yeah, so the process in Wisconsin is that first the legislature has to actually pass a ballot amendment to a constitution twice. So it was first, I believe, passed in 2016 and then again in 2017, which meant it would go then to the voters in 2018.
Okay.
So that's the process. So basically the final straw is, do the people agree that we should make this change to the Constitution?
Okay. And it's 2 legislative votes, but only 1
Vote
referendum.
to the people. Yep.
And how did that turn out?
So we won that vote with 62% of the electorate.
And when you say we, that would be the committee that was
committee.
opposing getting rid of the
Yep.
state treasurer. And I remember it being on the ballot, but we didn't hear a whole lot about the campaign leading up to it.
Yeah.
Now, but that referendum did it do better than the Supreme Court justice that won in April?
Yeah, I mean, this had a higher, as far as the people that voted, it was a significant percentage, yeah.
So it's, whereas, and the Supreme Court was supposed to be nonpartisan deal
Yep.
as well.
Yeah.
But again, why do you think, given that, there's a lot of disdain, a lot of jokes about government in general and
Yeah.
bureaucracy,
Yeah.
and, that kind of stomach level appeal to reducing government.
Right.
How did you fight that? What do you think, what arguments made the day for getting this, saving the state treasurer's office?
I mean, I think it comes back to people believe in checks and balances, and they believe in the importance of checks and balances. And so it was, if you're going to change the Constitution, it's got to be pretty significant. And people just didn't trust that change, and they wanted to have somebody that was kind of their advocate in kind of that more fiscal watchdog role. I mean, when I think about this and in talking to people on that trail, they were like, well, I know about the treasurer for my Boy Scouts, or I know about the treasurer for my nonprofit board. Why would we ever get rid of that role? I mean, a treasurer is a common role, whether it's in your nonprofits, if it's in your organizations, or even for corporate governance.
How is the state treasurer's office? Well, first of all, can you give us some idea of how big is it? Do you know?
I mean, as far as
Number of employees that would.
So what's interesting is that the current state treasurer was the one that lobbied Jamie actually to remove this office.
Okay.
So in trying, I think, to make a point, they whittled it down to maybe there might be 2 full-time staff to date.
Seriously,
Yeah,
2 people?
Yeah.
Okay.
To just say, look, we don't need it. And so it's pretty bare bones.
But like you said, wouldn't the times that having an independent financial officer be most important is when one party or the other, regardless of who it is, has total control over both the governor and both houses of the legislature? Wouldn't that be a time to have some type of check and balance? Because when you have one house ruled by Republicans, the other one Democrat, they kind of check each other to some extent. But if you have just one party dominating the scene, and then that same party is advocating for getting rid of any kind of independent watchdog. Should that raise concerns?
I mean, I think that's why another reason is people were like, no, we need to have somebody that we can go to say, who are you? Are you checking on this stuff? And what's been interesting is I think a lot of times people just forgot about the state treasurer. It's not like we've actually had an active campaign, whether it was somebody campaigning in this role or going on television or sending you emails. And so I think that's part of it too. People just didn't really know how this office could actually benefit them. They just knew it was something important to keep.
Right. Now in others, you mentioned that there's lots of states that have this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not uncommon because most of the states were created in the 19th century.
Yep.
And the 19th century had its economic downturns
Yep.
and its scandals,
Yeah,
if you will.
yeah.
So we have, and we like to think of Wisconsin as being nice and squeaky clean, and we wouldn't need anything like that. But other states, their state treasurer has played a key role sometimes in occasional scandals. And whatnot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think whether you're looking at states from Colorado to Rhode Island to California, they have been pretty critical. I mean, one recent interesting example is with the whole Wells Fargo incident that happened. So remember, Wells Fargo was kicking people off of their loans or raising interest rates, and they were never letting the consumer know about it. So state treasurers around the country were saying, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so whether it was canceling financial agreements at the state level with Wells Fargo or finding them, but they became the advocate to make sure that people weren't treated like that.
So would it be something where if something were uncovered by the state treasurer,
Sure.
whether in this state or another state, then do they work with like the Attorney General's office and so forth to be able to navigate things through the courts? Because obviously you don't have a legal staff.
So I think like some of that is, this goes back to like an independent elected office. I think you can have legal staff to help you navigate this. I think in some states they do have legal teams. I think in others they team up with the Attorney General. I think
Okay.
it goes back to the unique makeup of every state and what makes the most amount of sense.
Okay. So you've given us your little brief history with an interest in preserving the state office, but why Sarah Godlewski for serving in this capacity? What would your pitch to voters be on your main attributes?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, Jamie, it wasn't my dream to be running for state treasurer. I wasn't, as a kid, like writing dollar signs or putting safety deposit boxes on any sort of notebooks or anything. But as somebody who's been involved in your community, when you see something that can be better, you step up. And so me doing business, whether it's looking at how to invest people's money, to looking at large government budgets and accounting, I've been doing this my entire career, and I'm like, I should be doing this for the state of Wisconsin. I know that I can do so much more for them, and I'm just not going to sit back and let somebody else just not use this role to its fullest potential.
It is a full-time position.
Yep.
And it's not like, what about the company that you started up, the socially responsible investment company?
Yeah.
What would happen to that if you
I
were to
mean,
win?
I would completely resign. I've basically already done that. I've stepped down. And then, I mean, I would be then no longer involved in any of that work. So.
Okay, so now tell me a little bit, we've touched on it, but what was the argument by the legislature and the opponents of your committee for getting rid of the position?
I mean, the argument was, well, it's just big government, and we don't need it. And, you know, it's just a waste of tax dollars. But what's interesting is that this office actually doesn't use tax dollars. It runs on program revenue. So the revenue...
It's going to be another question I had.
Yeah.
All right, so go ahead.
So it runs on revenue, whether it's through the investments or through a program in Wisconsin called unclaimed property. So if you know, like when I worked at Pizza Hut at one point when I was in college or high school, and I forgot about my check there. And so it went into the unclaimed property program, and it earns interest. And so all of that is what helps actually fund the state treasurer's office. It doesn't actually use tax dollars to make it happen. So these arguments didn't make sense because it was a small office providing a check and balance that ran on the investments or the programs that it ran.
Okay, so we haven't mentioned, I don't know if we did, your opponent is Travis Hartwig.
Yep.
And so how does his experience compare to yours, or if you want to use it, talk about it in a positive way rather than being negative, you know, what sets you apart from maybe his background?
You know, I'll be honest, Jamie, I haven't really studied my opponent, believe it or not. Okay. I'm really focused on kind of our vision for this office and what we want to do and being that kind of fiscal watchdog for tax dollars. I know he has also done something in finance, but I'm not sure to the breadth or depth if he has private or public experience as well.
So you have both, private and public?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And you mentioned, you know, that stint with the Department of Defense. Yep. 10 years?
Yeah, a little less than a decade.
Okay,
Yep.
So tell me about that. What kind of experience did you get out of that?
I mean, I actually loved working for the Department of Defense. It was a great experience. A lot of things that we were looking at is how can the department be more effective and efficient? So a lot of my time was spent at the height of the Iraq war, and there was a lot of things going on, and we could have just, you know, we knew that we could do things better. And so whether it was with how we were deploying equipment, to how we were deploying people, to how we were investing in different language strategies, for example, but I really did a gamut of things, just kind of based on the current situation and what we needed to do.
Okay, very good. So what would be your big issues with the office. Obviously, you fought to preserve it, so now that it appears that it's saved from the chopping block for at least another 12 months. By the way, is there a limit on being able to try and get rid of this again? Or could this rear its head every time there's a new legislature?
I mean, I'm sure that they can bring it up again and again, but when a vote is as strong and as solid as 62%, in Wisconsin, that's a significant victory. And so I just think it's a waste of time, money, and effort if we try to go through this process again. And what's interesting is the people who brought up this legislation, two legislators said, look, if the people speak and say that they want this office, we're going to do everything we can to fully restore it, to make sure that it can do what they're looking at it to do.
Okay, so they said that they would do actions to fully restore. So how's that working out? That was on April 3rd.
Yeah.
Have they doubled the size from 2 to 4, or what have they done to?
So I think they're waiting until the session when they reconvene, which will be after actually November 6th, and there'll be a new legislature to really kind of push that forward.
But again, it doesn't take state general budget dollars to run it. So it's just, like you said, off-program revenues and investments and so forth. Okay. Anything else other than liking to, wanting to see it become effective and efficient? Anything else that you see as important in how to improve the state treasurer's office?
Yeah, I mean, really what we've been talking about are three things. So one is being this fiscal watchdog, because it hasn't been serving in this capacity before. And so some of the ideas that we've been putting on the table is to create a taxpayer annual report that is transparent about what did you actually get for your tax dollars, and that can be focused from transportation to maybe education, because I think it's sometimes a black box. We pay our taxes and it just kind of goes away.
Right.
And then we're sometimes confused. Well, I thought I just paid for this road to be fixed and it's not fixed. Or I thought all my money was going to public ed and it's actually going to maybe vouchers or something else. And so I think it's important that we're transparent and accountable for kind of how we're spending our money. And honestly, Jamie, I will say this has been something that has hit the forefront recently with this kind of fiscal watchdog aspect, because it was reported, 2 weeks ago, that $47 million are missing from the transportation budget. And this was money that was going to 3 regions in the state from the federal government. They were going to the Green Bay metro area, western Wisconsin, like the greater Eau Claire, and then Dane County in Madison. Okay. And the state doesn't really know where that money went. And so this is exactly where this role should be stepping in and saying, well, that's our tax dollars.
Sure.
So that's, I think, one thing that this office should and could be doing. I think the second thing is, as this kind of investor role, so as the financial trustee to those 4 trust funds worth $1.2 billion, it has independent investment authority in how that money is invested. Not to get too financially dorky, but it's in what's a fixed income account. So it's really kind of this low interest bearing account and government bonds, a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Now, what we could be doing with that fund is investing in ways that are still performing well, but also doing a benefit to the people of Wisconsin. So something that I've been talking about is, looking at refinancing student loan debt. So student loan debt, actually, Jamie, in the state of Wisconsin affects 1 million people, and it's about $27 billion.
Wow.
And interest rates last year alone were up to 14.75%. Now, what's crazy about student loan debt is that unlike your home, you can't refinance. There's no programs to refinance your loans at a lower rate. And so one of the things that we could do as a state agency is we could actually buy those high interest loans from students here in Wisconsin, and we could refinance them at a 4% rate, which is actually higher than the current trust fund is performing in certain areas, which is more at a 3 or 3.5. So we'd be having a better return and also helping thousands of Wisconsinites that have high student loan debt.
Well, and that's a very common problem, is the cost of education. Yep. And if you could bring that down, because some of these kids are coming out of college with just huge debt, right, and not even able to afford the interest, let alone pay down the principal.
Right.
So if you could reduce that interest, and now I'm assuming that would invite all kinds of scrutiny with how you monitor it and so forth.
Sure. And look, we would have to put together the risk profile and get into kind of some of the sausage making in that. But it's something that with Independent Investment Authority we can do. And what's even further interesting is that Wisconsin was actually thinking about this in the 70s. So they literally went to the Attorney General in 1976 to say, is this something, would you consider this an investment? And the Attorney General said, yes, this is actually, it's a public purpose. And that's what these investments are supposed to be, and this would be serving that public purpose. And it was specific about student loans.
Okay.
So there's even legal precedence that dates back to like the 70s.
Great. So increase transparency and accountability and improve the investments and the variety of investments. What would be your third?
The third would be kind of being that fiscal advocate.
Okay.
So, vulnerable populations across the state continue to be taken advantage of. I mean, the number 2 reason that the aging agency in the state of Wisconsin gets a call is because of financial exploitation. And seniors living on Social Security can't, survive if they've got a scammer that's calling them, taking their money. And oftentimes this happens more than once. It happens 2, 3 times. And there's not a one-stop shop in Wisconsin where seniors can get help, or to kind of navigate the situation and to protect them to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the same is true with veterans. Veterans come home.
Well, this third area sounds like it might impinge on the authority of either the Department of Ag and Trade and Consumer Protection or possibly the Attorney General. So how would you reply to that?
So what's interesting is that a lot of to your point, those responsibilities for more of a consumer advocacy role has been taken from the Attorney General, put into the Ag Department, but that has been significantly shrinked. And when there's a problem, I think, in the state of Wisconsin, and even if you might have the ability to do something, this goes back to being that kind of chief financial officer. And if seniors in the state are being affected negatively, I think we need to stand up and protect them. And so, in my mind, this is exactly something that this role should actually start doing, because it's a significant problem.
Well, excellent. Well, again, thank you for taking the time, stopping by, and nice to have you up here in western Wisconsin, not far, I know, from your home.
It's great to be home.
Right, and thanks for coming on the show and telling us a little bit about the office as well as your candidacy. Now, I see your campaign, it's a lot just Sarah. There's no other statewide candidates named Sarah?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Else I might be in trouble, Jamie. But last time I checked, it was just me.
All right. So it'd be Sarah G., but the longer version of the last name, Godlewski.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
And state treasurer. So watch for Sarah on the ballot and research the candidates. We invite our viewers to get involved. Election day is coming, less than, about 31 days away now before we have it. And early voting is going on in many municipalities, so research the candidates and please get out there and vote. Again, Sarah, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal.